Hello there, welcome. My name is Stefan Meyer. I am here up in Finland, Minnesota on the North Shore of Lake Superior. Today I am coming to you from the North Shore Agroecology Center. This is a research, education, and demonstration farm focused on regenerative agricultural practices for the North Shore bioregion and northern Minnesota in general. The North Shore Agroecology Center is actually a project of the Organic Consumers Association, which is a national organization that advocates and educates organic consumers. So welcome, because today we are going to be talking to one of my favorite plants, talking to, with, and about one of my favorite plants, Comfrey. And we're going to talk about its historical uses, but most importantly, we're going to talk about how it can help you create a nice, fertile garden. So, Comfrey. I would love for you to meet my friend Comfrey right here. Comfrey has a very long and ancient usage. It was actually first mentioned by, I believe it was Pliny the Elder back in around 400 BC. It has been used as medicinals, has been used as livestock fodder, and believe it or not, despite what we think about it today, it has actually a long history of human consumption as well. I will touch on that a little bit later, but today that particular aspect of interacting with Comfrey has fallen out of favor. But it is still widely used as both medicine and livestock fodder. So, Comfrey. When we're talking about Comfrey, it's really important to know that there are a few different types of Comfrey out there. What we have here is called Bocking 4 or Bocking 14. Now, those two are both hybrids, and they are a hybrid of what is known as Russian Comfrey and European Comfrey. So that is Symphytum officinale, which would be the European Comfrey, and Symphytum asperum, which is the Russian Comfrey. The important thing about this hybrid is that it does not produce viable seeds, so it will never spread by seed. That is really important to note, because if you have what's sometimes known as true Comfrey, which would be the Russian or the European, they will spread by seed, and let me tell you, they will spread through your garden. So it's really important to actually work with the Bocking 4 or 14. People ask, like, what in the world does Bocking mean? Well, a lot of the work done with this hybrid, making a hybrid of Comfrey, was done after World War II in England, outside of a small town called Bocking. And they had, to my knowledge, somewhere about 20 to 30 different hybrid varieties they were experimenting with. And to date, the only two that are in existence and still remain are Bocking number 4 and Bocking number 14. If you dive into it, there are some subtle differences between the two. One is apparently more useful as a livestock fodder. Another one is sometimes said to be more useful as a medicine. But generally speaking, here at the Agroecology Center, we have both, and their growth habit is fairly similar. How we would interact with it is also fairly similar. So if you have either one of those, or sometimes you don't even know which it is, it's just called a hybrid Comfrey. But that is what you're looking for. So as you can see, Comfrey can become a rather large plant. Typically, it can get to about 3 to 4 feet tall at various points in the season. It's got many different stages of growth throughout a single season. And one of the differences between Bocking 4 and 14 is one is sometimes said to only get to about 3 feet, the other one gets to about 4 feet. I'll be honest, I get a little confused about which is which, because when you do your research, you'll find things are attributed to one, then the same thing attributed to the other. That's why I tend to work with both Bocking 4 and 14. But you can see here, so this is Comfrey that has gotten pretty late stage growth here. It has already grown up. You can see it's formed a nice big stalk, and it's already gone through the majority of its flowering process. I really love to personally let it grow, at least some of my plants, to go through the flowering process. And these flowers will kind of fold out as they grow. The various pollinators really love it. But for me, the biggest one that I truly enjoy are the bumblebees. The bumblebees just love the flowers on Comfrey, and it does produce both pollen and nectar for the bumblebees. You won't really see honeybees on them because of the flower type. It is a real long, narrow flower, which honeybees generally have a hard time getting into, but bumblebees excel at dealing with that kind of flower. And you can see here, so we can kind of show you a leaf. So when it first comes up, we'll show you this in a little while on some Comfrey that we cut a few weeks ago, but they have this shaped leaf. It's very hairy. You will notice that both the leaf and the stem are extremely hairy. And for some people who are kind of sensitive, you have to be cautious because those hairs can irritate the skin. Usually I recommend people to wear like gloves or long sleeve shirts if you have a sensitive skin. I'm a sucker for punishment, so I just go in there bare armed but usually afterwards for the next day, my arms are nice and red. So I do recommend keeping your arms covered if you're going to work with it. But unlike stinging nettle, it doesn't necessarily have toxins or anything in it. It's more just that the hairs are very irritating. And so why don't we actually go now, we'll stop for a second here and we'll start up over at a Comfrey that we had cut a couple weeks ago as we were preparing for today's class. So you can see what happens when it begins or after it goes through a cutting phase. Okay, welcome back. Now we are over here on our little perennial forest berms, and we have a lot of Comfrey mixed into our berms here. And so in preparation for this little video segment, a couple weeks ago, we began making some Comfrey tea extractions. And this is one of the plants we cut. So if you remember, the previous plant we were just looking at was about 4 feet tall and was already starting to splay out. Well, we cut this, so this plant looked almost exactly like that, but so we cut it all the way down. And what you can see is happening here within just 2 weeks, it's setting up all these new little leaf shoots. And if you just leave it alone, it will again grow into a nice big plant, flower all over again. Up here in northern Minnesota, we have shorter summers. So I'd say up here you could probably cut a well-established plant at least twice over the summer, possibly 3 times. Kind of depends for us when that first frost comes. But I know in further south, people often talk about going through this full cycle of growing and cutting 4+ times a year. So again, I had mentioned earlier that it can be used as livestock fodder. And oftentimes this is when a lot of people will use it for livestock fodder, is when the leaves are a lot smaller, especially for chickens. Chickens really love the small leaves. Some other animals that really enjoy it, pigs, well, we know pigs just pretty much eat everything, but they also really enjoy Comfrey. So do goats will eat it, usually when it's small. Cattle, some people have talked about feeding it to cattle, some people have talked about feeding it to horses, but really it's kind of pigs and poultry are the 2 big ones. And they tend to use them when it's smaller. You'll get up to about right here. The leaves are younger, they're fresher. They probably have a higher protein content in them when they're smaller too, would be my guess. But again, if you want to make like a Comfrey tea, some people prefer just to use these leaves when they're smaller and not get the big thick stems that you can see here. This is the flower stalk. What I did last week when I made the Comfrey tea preparation, I just used leaves, stalk, everything, which is going to leave, as you'll see, a thicker mash that you have to deal with. Whereas if you just use the leaves when they're maybe about this tall and they haven't really stalked out yet, the leaves will almost completely disintegrate. And so it does make it a little bit easier to manage, but you just get less matter from that. So, okay. I think the next section we're going to talk about are the different ways that we can use Comfrey actually in the landscape as fertility, which is then going to lead us into talking about how to make your own Comfrey tea at home. Check back in a second. So one more thing I wanted to show you with comfrey regarding its growth habit. So here you can see real big comfrey plants. If you can kind of see what's happened is it grew, it flowered, and then at some point it basically became like a tower that just fell outward all the way around. And what the comfrey will naturally do if you don't cut it and use it is it will just start sending up brand new shoots like you see there, and it will start the process all over again. So this is one of the ways that comfrey actually builds soil around it. It will go through this process probably about 3 times over the course of a season, and then it just keeps decomposing, smothering things out around it. And over time, if you just leave a comfrey plant and you start digging underneath the soil, it will just have this real rich, amazing soil under the like around the comfrey plant from this process of growing, falling, growing, falling again and again and again. Okay, well, now that you've gotten to know comfrey as a plant, its growth habits, and how to interact with it and when to cut it, the next topic we're going to start diving into is why is comfrey so amazing as a fertilizer? Why do people use it as a fertilizer? And how are we going to use it as a fertilizer? So comfrey is widely recognized as a plant that just accumulates a lot of minerals. Every plant has different levels of nutrients and minerals in it as part of its genetic makeup and how it interacts with the environment. And comfrey is no different. So comfrey has a wide variety of nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which of course gardeners often talk about those as the big 3. But it also has lots of silicon, calcium, copper, iron, magnesium. And so as you can tell, it's got a lot of minerals in it. And oftentimes, like if you're familiar with NPK and like the 3 numbers you'll see on fertilizer bags. So comfrey kind of varies in terms of its numbers, and it's not real high, but it in terms of nitrogen, it's usually around like 0.75 to 1.5 is a number. For phosphorus, it's fairly low in phosphorus. It's usually about a 0.5. You'll typically see that in lots of compost. They'll list phosphorus around a 0.5. But where it really shines is potassium. It has a lot of potassium, often from anywhere from 2 up to 5. Of course, it kind of depends what soil it's growing in, how much moisture it has. So there's always going to be variabilities in that because plants are dynamic that way. But it does have a wide blend of minerals to it, and that is one of the reasons why it actually is a really good fertilizer. So how do you use it as a fertilizer? There are many different ways you can use it as a fertilizer. One real simple way to use it as a fertilizer, as we mentioned before, is if you feed it to your livestock, well, then you're turning comfrey into some good old manure, and that you can spread around your garden. Basically turning it into gold as far as I'm concerned. But more straightforward, you can simply chop and drop, which is a real common method for using comfrey in the landscape. Out in our berms and our food forest, that's one of the reasons why I have comfrey scattered throughout the system, so that we can basically be chopping and dropping. And as we'll go through the system a few times a year, when it gets to a certain height, we'll chop it and either just spread it right around that area. Maybe we'll chop it and put it around some of our young fruit trees, and then we'll mulch on top of it. So you're taking that mineral accumulation and you're just kind of moving it around your landscape, trying to equally distribute the minerals as much as possible. Another way that people will sometimes use comfrey, and this works best when the comfrey leaves are a lot smaller before they get the stem, is you can cut it, you can dry it and powder it, and then you can actually add that into a potting soil. And then as it basically degrades and decomposes in the potting soil, it's a kind of a slow release fertilizer. That's a real nice way to use it as a fertilizer. And that way also you can be creating that powder throughout the summer, and then you have a big quantity of it, which then in the next spring when you're in your greenhouse in March, comfrey's not growing in the landscape, at least not in Minnesota it's not, you can then pull that powder out and actually use it as a fertilizer in your potted plants you're growing out, or your starts. So those are some common ways to use comfrey as a fertilizer. Now, the next section of this video, we're gonna do what is known as comfrey tea. Sometimes it's referred to as a fermented comfrey tea or just comfrey ferment. And as you can tell by the fermented component, it does get a little bit stinky. So you may see a few grimaces in the next section of this video as I work with it. But as I look at it, the stinkier it is, the better it is. We'll see you in a second. And welcome back after we had a quick emergency wardrobe change. Now we are going to talk about the basic principle of prepping the comfrey for turning it into a ferment. As you can see here, I had already harvested one of the comfreys using my favorite little hand scythe. Very sharp, very dangerous, but very useful. Now, there are a couple different ways to do this. Today, what I'm going to show you how to do is just simply putting it in a 5-gallon bucket. Although you can make as much as you want. Again, over here, you might be able to see off to our side, we used a larger garbage can that we made about a month ago now. You could put it in a big, large bin if you had enough comfrey. So however much you want to harvest and however much tea you want to make. So there are a couple different ways to approach it. I mean, real simple. You can, if it's a larger container like that, I literally just took branches and all and just shoved it in, stepped on it and forced it down, left everything intact. If you're going for a smaller container, or if you maybe want it to break up or ferment a little faster or decompose a little quicker, you can just take one of these lovely little grass shears and, you know, just chop it up just like you're making a salad, comfrey salad. And then you have much smaller pieces that will tend to fit better into a 5-gallon bucket. And especially if you have a lot of stem, because you've let the comfrey kind of get big, and it's probably a good idea to do that. So that's really all you're doing, is you're chopping it up, and then you want to pack it as tight as possible. See, here's, you can kind of break them up easily too, so chop it or not. I tend not to chop, but you force it in. And you basically want to just fill this thing most of the way full. Oftentimes you want to leave a little room for some kind of a heavy rock like this guy, because once you put the water in there, the comfrey will at first want to float up. So putting a little rock or something heavy on the top just to keep it down at first is very useful. But this is pretty simple. I mean, you're packing this full, you're putting a rock on top, and you could fill it up with water. You can call it done there. I will also sometimes, if I have it on hand, if you've ever made compost tea, they'll do this. This is a high brix or high sugar content molasses. It's basically molasses for plants. I'll usually maybe, if I, like in a big container like that, I put about a cup of molasses in there. It helps feed the bacteria, and you know, maybe it helps get it going faster. Again, if it's around and I have it, I'll throw a little bit of that in there. I've also been known to sometimes add other plants into my comfrey mix. Maybe I've weeded out a bunch of dandelion, or I have some yarrow. Again, you can really ferment a lot of different types of plants, because all you're doing really is fermenting them to pull out their nutrients and their minerals. So you can do straight comfrey like I'm doing here, or you can use other plants and herbs as well. But yeah, so that's really all you're doing. Packing that completely full, stomping on it, throwing a rock, boom, down on top of it, and filling it with water. And then with the nice thing with a bucket, you can very easily just put the lid on it, set it aside, and walk away, smells contained, and it will be an anaerobic environment. I don't know if you can see here, like with this type of bin, it's not very strong, so the lid is not really staying on, so it is letting air and bugs in there. So that's one nice thing about something with a tight lid, is it will seal it up nice and tight and keep all the flies out of it. But there are different ways you can approach it. Depends if you have a lot of people walking by and how much it's going to smell. Okay, so the next thing you'll be seeing is us getting into the ferments and seeing how that looks. Okay, now we are moving on to the last yet arguably the most interesting part of this video. We are moving into looking at a compost tea ferment that we made, Comfrey tea ferment, I'm sorry, that we started about 2 weeks ago with the process that you just saw in the previous clip. And now we're gonna dive into it. So you can see here we have a range of different types of materials for filtering out the Comfrey tea. You can get as creative as you want. You can make your own large-scale filtration system. We have various things here that we've just kind of bought. You know, you can get a regular kitchen sieve and a 5-gallon bucket. That works great. The point again is just to get any organic mat chunks that are kind of left in there that haven't fully decomposed. So you can just get liquid. How finely you want to actually clean up the liquid to filter the liquid really depends upon how you're going to use it. If you're going to just use it as a soil drench, you can actually have a lot of chunks left floating in it and it works just fine. If you wanted to put it into any kind of a sprayer or even drip irrigation, you're really going to have to filter it out. I believe a drip irrigation needs to actually be filtered all the way down to about what they call 200 microns, so you don't clog your drip emitters. It can be done, but you know, again, it depends how you want to use it. Like a backpack sprayer, that also needs a pretty fine filtration so you don't clog up your nozzles, but again, you can do it. Today, we're gonna basically just use a little homemade system and do it it's gonna probably have some bits and pieces in it. It'll mostly be used as a soil drench for us. But another thing we have here is, as you can see, this is just, you can buy these at any kind of home improvement store. It's like a storage, it's meant for storage, but it has a slightly larger hole in it. And sometimes what I like to do is I will actually start with something that has larger holes in it, then take that product, put it through a finer sieve, and if I want to keep going, that way as you go, it's getting cleaner and cleaner and you're not clogging up whatever filter you're using. The other component I really like is a fork, a digging fork. And the reason I like this is, again, when I made, as you saw in the last section of the video, when I made this a couple weeks ago, I tend to cut the Comfrey when it has lots of big chunky stems in it. So there's going to be a lot left that has not decomposed. Again, if you focus more just on the leaf, you will find that almost all of it will have decomposed. And so now we are going to do the grand reveal. You can see there are a few flies around here, so it's not actually too stinky yet, but come on closer and let's see what we have going on. So this has been sitting in this garbage can now for about 2 weeks. And ooh, yes, we've got it looking nice and filled. Oop, I got the first whiff there. And that's before we've even dug into it. Now, some people really do their best to put this in almost in an airtight container. In parts, it'd be nice so you keep any potential flies out of it, because they will lay their eggs and it can get a little nasty. I don't tend to worry about it as much. So everybody kind of takes their own route. So as you can see now, as we kind of move it, that's right. I forgot about that. The rock I put on top last, you can see that right in there. That's the rock I put on top. Another rock over there. That's so that, as I mentioned, it will tend to float up when it's fresh. And so here I'm just gonna pull a little bit out here. So you can see there's, even after 2 weeks, there's actually quite a bit of matter left in there. You can see leaf, you can see some stem. I have left this in here up to a month. You know, and some people will actually even say you can leave it in there for a couple months. Some people say 2 weeks. Woo-wee, I'm catching that whiff now. So it really kind of depends how long you kind of want to leave it there. Sometimes it depends how long you forget about it. Guilty as charged. So what we're going to do is just lift a little bit, try not to get any on the power cords or on my clothes. And we're just going to put that right there. You can see it's like So this is really useful for this stage because it kind of just gets anything, lets the liquid that's actually in the plant. Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of leaf in here. I think this could probably stay in there easily for another few weeks and be just fine. But another way to do this then is, let's see if I can do it this way. Kind of get that in there, kind of go like that. Try not to get it on the handle. Then just lift it up, and of course then that gets it. And you can see you've got a nice, really brown, rich compost tea. Now you do, I'm gonna have to touch it, which means my hands are gonna smell for lunch. I can almost kind of smell, if you remember in the recipe that I just put in, I actually added a few extra things, and one of those actually was a little bit of blackstrap molasses. Just to add a few different minerals into the mix, but at the same time it also helps to feed the bacteria. And I can actually catch a faint whiff of that molasses in there yet. But you can just see how rich and brown that is. And this already is fairly well filtered. No major chunks are inside of it. But if I wanted to put it in the backpack sprayer, I would definitely put it through a couple more filtration processes. So that's what it is. So now it's time for the camera person to take a drink. Have a great day. Drink up, little tree. Well, that brings us to the end of our Comfrey fermentation workshop. I hope you learned something. And again, you can follow the North Shore Agroecology Center on Facebook. We also are on Instagram, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel where perhaps you're watching this. As well, we again are a project of the Organic Consumers Association, and you can also follow that. You can check out their website online. You can follow them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We will have more home fertility series coming up, so definitely check on in. Have a great day.